Hi, I'm Margaret Jurger, and I'd like to share with you some tricks that I've found that are fun and have helped children and adults read easier. I found these out as someone who's been working as a speech language pathologist for 45 years and as someone who's a mom and has done some research. I've put together 4 videos of different stumbling blocks that I've used tricks to help people read better. And they've been successful for me. And I was hoping to share them with you for free. Maybe it will be useful. Good luck. Okay, so today we are going to focus on number 2. This is a particular passion of mine. It's what's called phoneme awareness. And that really means that there's sort of a fuzzy awareness of various sounds. It can be very specific. And I wanted to explore how it was related to reading. So my research asks the question, rather informally, is fuzzy perception of speech sounds related to reading difficulties? And I compared 2 groups. One was from a school that was all identified as having learning disabilities, and another from students in a regular classroom that had not been identified for any special education. And I compared them at grade levels, so 2nd to 2nd, 3rd to 3rd, 4th to 4th, and 5th to 5th. I didn't start younger than 2nd grade for this. And I had them to complete a task that had them tapping for the targeted sound and finding out whether those people who had difficulty with this particular task also had difficulty with various reading tests that were also administered. And what I found was that I could predict those kids that came from the special school with 75% accuracy. It is somehow related. Now, my conclusion was that those who are not clearly perceiving a specific speech sound, whether it's a vowel, short vowels, all the short vowels, or R's or TH and S versus S, that they're missing that wealth of information all day, every day, that other people are getting. And it eventually shows up. It shows up in their spelling. It shows up sometimes in their reading, and often when they're writing. Now, I chose this particular picture because we can assume these 2 gals aren't paying attention at all. So they're not, the issue of fuzzy boxes doesn't pertain to them. But there were 3 people here that look like they are attending and maybe getting the information accurately. Some may not. These down at the end are portrayed kind of fuzzy. So they may not be getting some parts of it that not too clearly. Meaning may still be pretty good because sometimes we don't have any confusion. If it's a very specific sound, it doesn't really matter most of the time. Now, how does this phoneme awareness start out? Well, one, we know that interuterine children can hear, and what they're hearing is not precise sounds. They're hearing melody. They're hearing cadence. So their speech pattern, which if it's Spanish has a certain cadence versus English, when they start using it later on, it fits. Then we get our first sounds. And our first sounds are often which is we say is why it's mama, but in some language, has to do with food. Either way, it's often because it's accidental. If the lips are closed and the sound is coming out through the nose, the observer identifies it and reacts in such a positive way that often the student gets all excited and realizes that they've been reinforced. And so they want to do it again. And that's the beginning. By 3 months, we know that they can discriminate between ba and da in English. And of course, from then on, they're discriminating in simple words, and then it gets faster and faster in speech. Now, what would happen if this process gets slightly interrupted? Not horribly sometimes. It could be a long interruption. It could be hospitalization over a period of time where the focus is not necessarily on listening, but on thriving. It could be just occasional interruptions. Ear infection. Tests have not shown, you can't really do a real good study of this, because if the ear was just beginning to discriminate between two sounds at, say, less 15 months, that's when you had the hearing problem because you had a cold, then that gets kind of boxed together as one sound. But if the child next to you, that discrimination is learned at 12 months, but has a hearing problem at 15 months, it's not going to have an effect. So it's really hard to test and see when the interruption was and how critical it might have been for specific learning. There's also the issue of interruption to attention to sound. We know we have a certain number of children that are distractible, very distractible for one reason or another. And that sound and sight are competing for attention, and sometimes things might get missed. This is how we form what I call boxes. And often they're language specific. Okay, so if I am a kid and I mix up SH sh with s in the word sit, people will laugh at me. And I will quickly learn not to do that. That difference between sh and s is not that important in some languages, but it is in ours. Let's say Japanese. Japanese has su, which unfortunately happens to be my granddaughter's name, Sukiko. It is not Sukiko, which of course we often think of as the way it's said. It is important in their language that you know that the sound is different between su and su. Just as we would say stop and sop are different. Now, L's and R's, many languages, they are different. Even within our own country, we have some issues with L's and R's. So it's understandable. When I work with the adult population who have a different, or Japanese, it appears as if they're confusing the L and the R, and what actually they have, which I usually compliment them and saying, you have a sound that's halfway in between. And so you're using that sound, whether it's an L or an R. And our ears say, you got it in the wrong box. You really don't have it in either box. You have it in the middle. But to us, it's not right. So it must be the other box. You see how subtle this is? Then as we get more sophisticated, we form bigger boxes. So we don't have to program every little detail. So let's use the Insky, like Lewinsky or Kaczynski. We didn't ever have to think much about the Insky part of that. We just got the first part and we knew we had two different people. So how does that affect in subtle ways the beginning of reading? I work with a number of kids that were having difficulty in first grade. And what happens is that they are taught at the beginning usually through short vowels, which are actually harder to discriminate than long vowels, but they're easier to spell. So it's sort of a question of which one do you start with. But most of our reading programs start with short vowels. So they start with, say, ah, And everybody's very proudly writing little words like bat and rat and sat. And then they're getting all these stars. And then the next week, they go to it. And it's sit and bit. How does that work? Especially if you don't hear the difference. And I've had kids who got so frustrated by it because they just copied from the next page because they were always wrong. They couldn't see, why are we putting another letter in there? It's the same sound. To them, it's a homophone, what we would call a homophone. So as this gets harder and harder, and kids sometimes feel, I've seen first graders who come in very bright-eyed, parents feel they are really with it, kids bright, and the eyes begin to look more and more puzzled and more unhappy. So what are some of the symptoms? Well, of fuzzy boxes. Speech isn't necessarily unclear to us. The adaptations are so fast that we sort of, our ear adapts. But sounding out words can be hard, especially with short vowels, if that's the issue. Spelling of nonsense words, not accurate. There is a test that is given just to find that out. Multisyllabic words are hard to decode, but of course that doesn't exist early. And it's later you begin to see the complexity and how hard that is. And often if there's a drop, if you drop the sound S in written language, you've lost plurals, possessives, and tense markers. Same thing with T and D. You've lost past tense. So those things are important if you want to write, spell correctly. So can this be changed? Absolutely. But first, in order to save time, you don't want to do one big whole program of phoneme awareness of all the phonemes of the world, or even of English. You want to target the phonemes that are confusing for this particular individual. So you're going to have to do some detective work to find out what that is. Now, working with them, let's say you see there's quite a few little glitches. Working with the S is valuable. The S contrasted with TH, which often is thought of as the confusion of a lisp, but it's also valuable, as we mentioned, for grammar, tense markers, plurals. It's also pretty fun to listen for. It's prolonged. You can prolong it and go, and you can really contrast it with other sounds and makes people feel good about knowing that they've got it. They know that difference. Then R and L are harder, but they're very powerful to know the difference between the two. I had a 21-year-old who, when his mother asked him to read for me, and he had a really rough time reading, he was eyes blinking, feet moving. I began to see that his shoulders would shrug every time he come to a word with an R or an L in it. So you keep notes of what's going on so that you can see where the breakdown is. Vowels are useful. Short vowels are especially difficult to hear the difference. And blends are the really tricky ones, so you save them. You don't deal with them until they've got the ear for the sound by itself. And the way that develops is first there's an omission of one of the sounds, and then they put them together with the sound in between, like stop, or p, per, p, it's not pr. And then they finally are able to put it together because it is pretty complex. So when you're working with this person, you want to be a cheerleader. You want always positive reinforcement. You want to figure out what the next steps are so you don't overwhelm them. or you don't bore them. And when you hit a wall, you want to be able to figure out what happened and go back a step or two and see how that works. Or you can maybe move around whatever the wall is. And this is just something I say often. When we're teaching, we're not imparting information so much as helping the flow of curiosity to make it kind of an adventure. So, when you're being a cheerleader, watch your face. Your face tells the person an awful lot. And if you're saying, oh, that's good, but your face doesn't say it, be careful. Okay. If you're working with your own child, by golly, they really know your face. They know when you're angry. That's something they know. I just have to say this very quick little story. My adult daughter had just broken up, and I was asking her about how she felt. And she said, Mom, take off your diagnostic face. I hadn't realized I was doing that. So our kids read us, and we need to be as honest with our own emotions as we can. And observe the spelling or specific words or sounds that they're struggling with and write it down. So you have a little clue. You're kind of the detective here to see where you want to focus their energies. Now, there's a program that I developed. Actually, this is something I started with. It helps with articulation. It helps with accent reduction. And I was surprised it also helps with phoneme awareness, because that's actually what it's all about. And that's what got me going on this research. And so this program that I will share with you in the other, there's a whole other video showing you the way to do it. But it's to sensitize the ear to a specific speech sound at the rate of speech. If you stop at the word level, like, oh, is dog and fog the same or different? That's not real life. Real life is, as I'm speaking right now and you hear me stumble on a sound, there's a thing in your brain called the P300 goes up. You know it. So that means you're tracking me all the time. And your brain is absorbing and learning constantly. So what to do now? You can contact me. I'm Dr. Margaret Jerger. info@soundsteps.net. And you can write your comments or questions. But if you want to do one-to-one with me, that's okay too. And we want to consider checking out any other of the videos. As you recall, there's one on reversals, which you may or may not have seen yet. There are two on phoneme awareness. This is the first one. And the second one is what I call the tapping game, to show you how to remediate it. And the third one is a bunch of different decoding strategies using speech sounds. Good luck.